what I want to do is a little bit like kind of decompose for you both like what are we actually meaning if we say mindfulness or meditation. It became like this holy grail, which, you know, in the West is treated like now can treat cancer and whatever. And, you know, nobody knows really anymore what is mindfulness, meditation. I always say it's a bit like, you know, in the early days, journalists would come and say, can you tell us in one sentence what the effect of meditation does? I'm like, this is how, as if you would ask a sport expert, what does sport does to us? You know, it depends on whether we are riding, chess playing, it's like a huge world, and we are just starting, you know, to understand the complexity and the intertwined of this world. So I just show you a little bit how we, you know, as scientists, we are always analytical. So starting to think, how can we decompose these kind of aspects like empathy, compassion, perspective taking, which are actually all different qualias, but also they rely on different brain circuitry, and I'll show you that. And then, depending on the time, you know, it always depends on the flow. I have many data of the resource project showing you that meditation or mindfulness is not just a thing. It depends what you do every day with your mind and with your heart especially. And a reason why we wanted to do the resource project was, at that time when we started, mindfulness was starting to come out like a big thing, you know, like the 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction program of Jon Kabat-Zinn. But like the Guardian articles has put it in really nice terms, very quickly the West kind of took mindfulness and made it to a reductionist attention efficiency boosting approach. And I was working in London at that time on empathy, compassion, and the heart quality and the frequency of the heart, and not just attention and the mind. And, you know, having been encountering Buddhism and a lot of other spiritual traditions, I had a lot of different masters from different spiritual traditions informing me, and what I could always feel in terms of the commonality of all these masters I was meeting is that they were living from the frequency of the heart. And that's so different from what in science is mostly valued is the brain. You know, when we have our meetings from morning to evening, we talk from 9 o'clock to the evening 8, from here to here. And then you're like, oh, there's a body. That's interesting, you know. I have to feed it, I think, you know. But it is not so much integrated. And so in a way there was an attempt to say, can we also expand this work on mindfulness to all this quality of ethics of the heart, of compassion. And as you will see, so because I was also talking to a lot of economists at that time, I was professor in Zurich in an economy department, and I figured they never talk about altruism, compassion, empathy ever. I'm like, why is that? I thought they would care for the common good. So why would these concepts, which were so dear to me, never entering any utility function? So we did a conference in 2010 with Mind and Life and the Dalai Lama on altruism and compassion in economic systems. And since then, I tried to bridge these worlds and to see, you know, how can we actually use psychology, neuroscience, and contemplative science to address problems which are not just individual, but also macroscopic societal, like climate change and poverty in the midst of plenty, depletion of our earth. But also below is a bit like, you know, one concern I have, I always think it's one of the biggest epidemics of our time, and nobody really talks so explicitly about this, I think, the experience of subjective loneliness. And it is measured, you know, like how lonely do you feel, not like how lonely you are, but how do you feel. And it is now increasing in young people. Usually it was something the old had, like 80 plus, because a lot of people were dying. But now there is a new survey from America where they show that the 18 to 24 are the loneliest, even though the most connected to the apps. But the subjective feeling of loneliness is actually predicting mortality, all kinds of diseases, lots of objective measures. And we wanted to see also, can we reconnect people into the notion of interdependence, that we are interconnected and not these individual inflated, you know what Brother Davis in the first day said so much, we have somehow lost the memory of the big self where we are all in a common ground, and the egos got inflated and inflated. And you know, I can tell you, working in very ego-driven scientific systems, this happens very easily because it's all about competition, all about you being first author, all about you publishing more, it's all about being evaluated. So, you know, all our big systems have the focus on that. So it's no wonder, you know, that we are coming out like that if we are like surrounded by that every day. And so at that time we thought, okay, how can we, you know, contribute? And I was talking to these economists, and the economists usually they say we have to change laws, we have to change, you know, nudging is a whole kind of new movement, or like the institutional design. And I was always like the psychologist, and I was like, you have to change yourself, and only then we will have societal change, you know. Now I think differently. I think both need to be congruent to each other. I really have witnessed myself through a lot of failures how it is impossible to actually you know, put internal change programs into the world if the structure in which you put that in is totally incongruent to the values you want to. So let's say a completely individualistic, competitive structure like scientific system in a hierarchical masculine world, you know, and then you want to put mindfulness I mean, you need time, we reduce contracts of 3 years only instead of 10, which you would need, you know, to really have this sustainable long thing. And so there is a huge amount of structural incompatibility, and I have seen the same for the education movement. You know, if the schools are totally hierarchical, the kids, they open their hearts and so subtle and so cute, and then they come out beaten up. This is even worse than if you would not have opened your heart. So I think we have a responsibility, if we think about individual and societal change, to make congruent the structure we are in, and that's not an easy task, yeah, especially if we have to deal with these huge systems. But to make a congruency between the internal change and the institutional designs and rules. So that will be my, I think, like many years of reasoning, how can we do that, you know? Okay, let's go now dive into this resource project, this crazy thing. And what we had, it's a bit different from Cliff's Shamatha project in that sense that we followed people in their everyday life, you could say, people who had never meditated. So the people who were in the Shamatha project went in an intensive, you know, 1 month retreat, but they had a Buddhist view, they had meditated before. And we were really doing this kind of hardcore science saying, you are not allowed to have done any meditation in your life. And it was very interesting because I was at that time director in Leipzig, which is the former East. And many people, because of the history, had not even known who is the Dalai Lama. Can you imagine? And they enrolled in a 9-month meditation study without knowing anything about a spiritual background. But that was somehow interesting, you know, would that work? That, you know, we kind of have a 9-month intensive, and 300 people went through this thing, and we have 3 modules, and the colors are helping you to understand the data I will show you. It's color-coded. So the presence is perhaps what you could call attention-based mindfulness. So that's what nowadays you can find in almost every app. You know, breathing meditation, body scan, it was very much influenced by the MBSR course, which had that as a core. And we were a bit like doing something else than what practitioner would do. We were trying to decompose meditation practice in 3 big families, types of meditation practice. So the first 3 months were really you alone bringing your mind back in the present moment, either through breathing meditation, body scan, sound meditation, smell, like sensory, and always back to the present moment. But you were doing that alone, like classic meditation. And I liked somehow the article of this conspiracy theory in Guardian, because they said the danger of having the focus on yourself in the West is that it becomes, again, a selfish practice. Something like me becoming less stressed, me becoming more efficient, me becoming, you know, a better, like more efficient being. And that's also how a lot of companies, as we heard, are now using it. So the second module, that's what you know, I came from. It was like the heart, this is red. This is like the whole empathy, gratitude. And Brother David was one of the big early inspiration to put gratitude practice also into that, not just what the Buddhists know as metta meditation or like loving kindness meditation, compassion. We have everyday gratitude also, because it is the same system, you could say, which you kind of activate. And then the green one is something which in the typical kind of 8-week secular programs which are around is less often taught. So that I will show you how that came from social neuroscience research, this division. And is also working on self, is also working on the question, but just the beginning, who am I? And you work on aspects of yourself and how you can look as an observer on how being identified with different aspects of self is creating a new reality in a social way with others. But we also, you know, elaborate, it's a more cognitive part where this observer, the metacognitive observer is cultivated. It's not so much the emotional and heart quality than this kind of what the Buddhists would call view or wisdom. It's a more, and why we also included that is because in the many meetings with the Dalai Lama at that time, we were always like, you know, the heart and the motivation and compassion. And he was like, don't forget wisdom. Don't forget wisdom. There are two birds, two wings of the birds, compassion and wisdom. And I was like, what does he mean? I don't. So it took a long time for me to kind of get that all together. And we tried to make a first step in this model. So like with the Shamatha project, we worked, it's a real community. We had almost 100 people under contract in peak times. So 17 different meditation teachers coming together. And that was also a super interesting process, because to devise the 9 months, 1 year program, we had to learn an Esperanto, because the teachers were coming from different spiritual traditions. Everyone had their concepts and what they call, and so we were sitting over 2 years in meetings and saying, how should we name it? Is it attention? Is it mindfulness? Is it open presence? Is it? And so we had to find a language where we could all agree. So that was the first most important step, because once we had found the language everyone could somehow agree, we could teach it to 300 other people without being too much in one lineage. It's a kind of was an interesting experience in its own. And then, so this is the model, like the 3 months modules, and you always have 2 core exercises you do every day in your life. And for that, we designed an app. And here, was really interesting too, you know, because I show you here, this is like the loving kindness meditation, for example, in the affect module, and then observing thought meditation in the more, you know, perspective-taking cognitive module. But we also designed for these more social modules what we called contemplative diet. And that's a practice which is not so much classic Buddhist in a way, because you do it together. It's a loud meditation together. So one listens, the other answers a certain question. Like, you know, what was difficult and how did it feel in your body? Or depending on the module you are in. Or like taking a perspective on an inner part. You know, how does that create your reality? And then they switch. And we, for the first time, started to think, perhaps we can do that as a daily practice where people call each other every day, 10 minutes, and then every week you change partner. So we call that an intersubjective practice, because there is a real being. You don't have to imagine another person, there is another person, and they change So if we would do it together, after 18 weeks or more, I would have done that with each of you probably at some point. And I would have learned your deepest secrets and your shared humanity with me. So that was an exercise a bit risky. And then, Google, when they heard about it, they called me up and said, okay, that's another thing, but they called me up and they said, can we have this dyadic exercise and scale it up and have an app and only do that? And I was like, our people, they do 3 days retreat where they get introduced by 17 teachers into the practice and why. Every week they meet 2 hours together as person. And then this app is just a mean to the end for daily practice. They said, I knew you would be the bottleneck. They had already, the contract was already in the attachment, signed from them. They just wanted my signature, like, our whole purpose of this is to rebuild communities, to reconnect people. And you want to scale up an app only because we said, we have to also teach teachers before we can, give this program. He said, but this takes too long. This can take years. I'm like, yeah. Consciousness is a lifelong endeavor. And so that was my first, and then I had so many encounters of that sort, 9 months program in business? No, we have 2 days, max. Anyway, so this was also some, we started testing in 2013 and ended our testing in 2016. So for many years, every day we were testing. It's a long time endeavor. And perhaps you will see one thing, this is a kind of trick because, like what Cliff was starting to refer to, it's super difficult to do real research with this kind because you need the active control group. This is like the active control group. And that means people who do the same thing but something else. And then to devise another 9 months program on food, we would have killed ourselves. So what we did is to just change the order of the modules. So at some 80 people were starting with, mindfulness-based attention practice, then going in compassion-based practice, and then in these perspective and self-other related practices. And the other one was doing it in the reverse order. So we could compare after 6 months, what is the specificity of doing hard practice every day compared to doing metacognitive practice, same people. So it's a very what we call conservative test because we compare meditation with meditation. And a lot of people said, you will find empty brains, you will not find anything, you compare meditation with meditation. But we said, if meditation is this big complex thing with different qualias and different, it has to show up in the data as different. And I'll show you that it showed up. So that's the app with the teachers. This is, we could kind of spy on our 300 participants even in the holidays because we had this app and then we asked them, what are you feeling, what are you thinking? They were really tested a lot. And for that, we were afraid they would drop out and they didn't. It was like really a huge participation rate to the end. This is the dyadic exercise. So when they meet, it looks like that. You turn your cushion towards each other and you look in the eyes. It's a very intimate experience. But when you do it every day, we had an app where you put your partner into the app and then you start the exercise and 10 minutes later it's over. So you cannot chit-chat. It's a real meditation. And then we asked them before and after the diet, because this was new for us, 2 rings, and we said, how close did you feel before you did this intersubjective meditation? So if I would feel very symbiotic with the person, my wings would be like that. If I feel very far away, like that. And so we could just make quantitative science with how close and how socially related people feel. And what we showed here is that actually, irrespective whether it was more the perspective diet or the more affective one, people felt much closer after the diet to other people. And that was really true for everyone. There was no variability, really, not a lot. So we were really happy because at the beginning people said, are you crazy? I have to make a phone call with people I don't know every day, 10 minutes for 6 months now? And we said, take it like a brief toothbrushing. And it's just a prolonged toothbrushing. And if you really don't like it, you can stop. Nobody stopped. You can become a bit addicted. Me too. I'm confessing it's like in Christianity you had the Beichte. The confession. It's not the same, of course, but it has this witness. You are making a deep practice on your own, but you have a witness, an intersubjective witness. And what was also interesting is that they felt connected to other people even before doing a diet. From week to week to week, they felt closer to people they had not known before. So it kind of brought this kind of interdependence feeling of shared humanity about. And also here we ask, how personal was the thing you disclosed to the other? And at the beginning you were a bit shy, you said for a stressful situation, I had missed my bus and, things like that. But then at the end they really went into very deep stuff. So it was interesting to see how this trust was building up. And we really felt, and that was also interesting just as an observation, after the attention mindfulness retreat, it was nice, the 3 days, but the people were not so connected yet. But after these compassion-based and perspective where the diets was part of it, it was like glue. They were so like a family afterward, like a sangha. And in a way that was interesting because Cliff noticed about, the context, and Buddhist practice has always been in a context of a sangha. People don't do it alone at home. That's not where these practices come from. There was always a connectedness to a group, and it's different. And nobody has, I think, done research on it, but everyone knows phenomenologically, if you sit alone at home or you sit with 80 people in a retreat not talking, it makes a whole difference. And this aspect of community and context and shared humanity, that's something we need to bring back into the picture of what we do here. So that was just the slide, before the data came out, my biggest stressor was, will these people break up this crazy experiment after 8 weeks, and people had told me you will have a dropout rate of 70% after 8 weeks, and I was super stressed because I had a responsibility for so many students who needed to do their careers on these data. And so that was actually the best number from resource for me. It was like less than 80% stopped. So from 300 people were just really engaging, and that's kind of, for people who do intervention research, now it's a kind of Guinness Book of Records number, because it's really, like such an intense schedule and so on. And also several of them are self-organizing 3 years later to still do diets every day. Totally crazy. I would never have thought that they would continue after 9 months of the study. Anyway, so we had more than 90 measures. And I can show you only a fraction of it, but we try to have a holistic approach and not only take, what we heard yesterday, third objective measures, but we also included phenomenological measures. So these are interviews. They have been developed by a pupil of Francisco Varela, to start doing really what we call neurophenomenology. Is bringing the first person perspective together with the measurement, the objective measurement. It's what we talked with Brother David the first day, but also the second day, is the importance to marriage, the experience which nobody can measure through a third, it doesn't tell me when I show you brains, I can show you brain, I have no idea how it feels for the person experiencing. So we start developing methods, how can you get at the experience in the most subtle and complex way, but then the big challenge is how to bring that together with brain data. This is a chapter on its own. Okay, so now I promise to go a bit like into this kind of idea of dissociation. Our meditation teacher asked, why have you separated the compassion module from the perspective? What is the thing? And so we explained by showing our social neuroscience And I can also, over many years, you know, social neuroscience wants to understand the neural network which are allowing us to understand each other. How do I know what you feel? How do I know what your beliefs are? I'm not you, so how do we communicate? It's a wonder. And we started decomposing, you could say, the social brain and showing that these things like empathy and compassion and perspective taking are three very different things. And it's very difficult to give definition because everyone will say, but Aristoteles had a completely different, and you know, the clinical people have other definition of empathy than we use in social neuroscience or developmental psychology. So I can only give you the definition we use without claiming that this is the definition of empathy or compassion. There is no unitary definition. We have done a huge amount of work on looking at that. There is really not an agreement. What you can say is that we as a scientist, we are starting to decompose tiny, 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 whereas clinicians usually use the word empathy in a very broad way, meaning everything which to do with the other. But because we are doing science, we look at the more subtle differences between these concepts. And that was I tell you a little history, science history, because this is also an example of how, you know, working like what Cliff showed, you know, first we went to the Buddhist monk to understand how do experts, you know, what do they do? And we learned from them. But I want to show you an example how working with Buddhist monks and scientists together bring about an emergent new property where we both learned from each other. And I think that's the important thing. If we come together across culture, we should not use one to just prove what the other has always said. We should emerge into something we both didn't know and emerge into something new we co-create. And that's just an example so I was basically an empathy researcher and in London, and we had done these first empathy in the brain experiments, and you know, we had given pain to someone lying in the scanner, and then I measured the pain matrix in the brain, which gets, you know, which processes this complex thing like pain, and then someone else would get pain, and I was just seeing, oh, a partner gets pain or someone I don't know, and we could see that similar networks, which are like this alerting, you know, negative affect pain networks, get activated if you only know there's someone else suffering. So this is what in the literature later we called very shortly empathy for pain network. And so it was, usually the core was in the insula, in the kind of interoceptive cortex and the ACC. And I have now, for easiness, marked them in blue. So that's a network which comes with the sharing of pain. You feel negative, you share the pain in terms of activating networks which process your own pain. It's like a musician, a resonance. So empathy is no normative. It's basically you share an emotion with another person. If someone is happy, you are happy. If someone suffers, you suffer with. So it's what Batson called feeling with. But compassion is feeling for. And this little tiny word, with or for, makes a huge difference if you start looking into brain and go deeper into the qualia. So I was, at that time, I was very naive. I was like, wow, you can measure empathy in the brain. Because at that time, you cannot imagine how science is. You know, the neurologist I was in London said, Tania, you will not measure anything because you are measuring a feeling which is not in you. It's another person suffering. Why would you see it in the brain? I'm like, because you feel it. I feel the suffering with someone else, so why should I not measure it? But at that time, they really were laughing about doing this experiment. Then you saw this huge pain matrix blowing up. Now there is lots of empathy research showing that there is this kind of reliable alerting response. And then I thought, oh, we have to train empathy in everyone. This is so amazing, and a very naive approach in a way, but you know, this is how you do research. You start and then you falsify yourself and you learn. And so at that time I was also getting part of Mind in Life Institute, and all these kind of monks came into my life. That is a picture you know, I always say we could use this as a you know, attention measure. Find Mathieu and Tania. So I am easy because but he is not, because he's a monk among 10,000 monks. And that was the meeting which brought, where kind of there was a decision, in a way, a formal decision to bring science into monastic curriculum, which had not been changed for many 600 or whatever years. So everyone was coming together. And I have to say, you know, that's another topic. See any women here on this slide? You. There's one and me and some more which you cannot see here. But this was a bit of a shocking moment, you know, the whole Buddhist community coming together to, you know, like from all the monastery, and then 10,000 males. So there's another issue here. But okay, so there very nice males came to our labs, like Mingyu Rinpoche. This is from Richie, the picture, and that's Mathieu. And Mathieu became a real good friend because somehow he was a molecular biologist in his former life, let's say, and so he knows science by heart. He knows how we think and what we have to do and blah blah blah. But he then became adept of one of the biggest compassion master ever in Buddhist tradition, and so he is an amazing meditator at the same time. So when you do research with him, he is constantly switching role between the Tibetan meditator and the scientist. So I had him in the scanner, and we went to a real-time scanner in Maastricht, and that is something for scientists a bit like looking like a rocket going to the moon, because a real-time scanner gives you in real time the brain activity of people. You know, usually the picture you see take months to statistical analysis, you know, they're not just like showing up. But here you could see a little bit building up. So we put Mathieu as guinea pig in the oven, we call it, because, you know, he's lying still like this. And we asked him very crazy things, which you could never ask someone who is not an expert of mind, to say, can you go in 30% intensity of disgust? And then 100, and then 30 positive emotion. And so, you know, if you would ask someone untrained, they would say, I mean, you know, not even I can produce these feelings, but not to kind of 30, 60, 90 intensity. So that was for us. We saw, then I show you only the data where we ask him to go in different states of compassion, non-referential, loving kindness, and to the 30, 60. And you know, I remember Rainer Goebel, who kind of software developer of the real-time machine, he said, I have never seen these bar charts so pure. It's like in a textbook, you know. You could print it. It's just too beautiful to be true. But what happened is that Mathieu was somehow meditating, and instead I told him, can you go in compassion, thinking that he would do empathy. It's like suffering with, he imagined children in an orphanage really suffering from autism and deprivation, really horrible picture he had seen in a BBC movie. And what I saw is what we call kind of reward network. It's like network in the brain, nucleus accumbens, and who are usually activated through positive affect, you know, like affiliation or positive affect. And not the empathy for pain network I had seen in her, and so I'm like, is he thinking about his dessert or what is he doing? You know, I was really puzzled, so I asked him, I said, are you actually meditating on compassion? You know, I thought empathy, compassion, same thing, you know, are you suffering? And he's like, yeah, you said I should meditate on compassion. And I said, yeah, but I don't see any negative affect circuitry I would, you know, expect. And so he came out, and it was like lost in translation. You know, I was like, what are you really doing? And he is like, I don't have to feel suffering with another person, especially if I go in non-referential compassion. I just pour out this kind of motivation of care and love. And so I don't have to resonate with the suffering. I can, but I don't, it's not what I usually do when I practice this. And so I was like, really? So then I asked, you know, I said, for the sake of science, could you go back and just go into empathic resonance and just suffer with the other? And don't do what you do usually. Don't go in compassion and all that stuff. And so he was a bit like, why should I do that? doesn't make sense. But then he did it, and then what was really interesting is that then we saw this other network lighting up, this kind of pain-related suffering, and I said, okay, his brain is, as expected, like other people would do. But then I asked him through the loudspeaker, I said, Mathieu, do you want now to go out to lunch because it's a long time you have been in the scanner? And he backed me from the scanner and said, please, Tania, it's unbearable. If I only stay in empathic resonance, it's unbearable. I'm burning out in the scanner. Can I do, for my own sake, some blocks of compassion and loving kindness and compassion for others, just for me to feel better and to be in a better state when I come out? And I was like, okay, and so we kind of, then he produced this other state, and then this other network came back, and I understood that these are two completely different states, not only phenomenologically, what we understood more and more by asking people, but also in terms of the biology. So we did then a lot of studies, because you can't publish a crazy single Buddhist brain. So we had like lots of students coming in, and over years and years we brought back this kind of knowledge into papers. And that's just showing you, this is like a design, if you take students who had never meditated and you instruct them into empathy, and then a week later into compassion, and you show them videos confronting with suffering, even in these naive people who have not been, trained for years and years, you can see these two different networks, the empathy for pain network, when they practice this empathic resonance, and then here in red, this compassion network, when they really go into a compassionate state. And so we have, we have done now a lot of studies showing that this model would mean, and the press got it again wrong. Press is usually getting things who are a bit subtle completely wrong. So they basically said, Tania has shown that empathy is bad. I'm like, I'm an empathy researcher. So the thing is, empathy is a normal reaction to suffering. We have it. We are, whether we know it or not, we have a resonance. We are always in resonance with others. But there is this danger to go into empathic distress. And when it becomes distress, it becomes a very selfish thing where we are mostly preoccupied to get rid of this negative feeling. So we either like push people away, or we get cynical, or if we are constantly in empathic distress, which in a lot of helping profession happens, you can burn out, and this is probably one reason. There are also structural reasons for the huge amount of burnout rate in helping profession and healthcare system. And so nobody teaches medical people how to move from empathy to compassion, and how you can approach suffering in another way by just staying open, not cynical or disgusted, but just like really have this heart opening. And Mathieu said, you can't burn out of too much love. You can't. You can just more and more unfold it and cultivate it. So this is what we do this is what we do a lot in this affective compassion module, is teaching people how to recognize these different states and moving from one to the other without, pushing one down or the other. It's just recognizing, and it is amazing. I've seen 300 people in retreats. When they go into this empathy, they start, we had tissue boxes. I didn't measure that, but I could have. We had tissue boxes, and after the presence and perspective retreats, no tissue. I mean, some had a cold, but after the affect retreat, they were empty. Because people sobbed their tears out when they encounter their own suffering and empathy. They have to deal with their own trauma coming up in the suffering. And then when they transform that into this open heart, the whole face, the posture, everything changes, and you can really see how that lifts up the whole experience, and the contrast between both. I mean, a lot of people said, who are working, by chance in professions, helping professionals, that doing these exercises somehow saved their everyday life in the clinic, because they really started understanding, wow, there's another way I can approach this suffering I'm confronted every day. And now this is just like, the two wings, the wisdom part. In social neuroscience, you call that theory of mind. And, or you can also call it cognitive perspective taking. And the easiest thing to make the difference between empathy is, compassion and empathy is super easy for people you like, your children, your friends. But if someone has hurt you, or someone is from a different culture, has different beliefs, and you really dislike these beliefs, or someone has harmed someone from your family or so on, it doesn't help to just say, open your heart and love them, because you will have a block. And so as long as you don't learn how to take the metacognitive perspective, the observer's perspective, and you understand that another person can hold totally different beliefs, and that beliefs are only a co-creation of our cultures and our education, and nothing firm, that you are getting flexible in that, and also your own identity and parts of identity. As long as you don't get that, you will not move in what is called global compassion. You can move into something which is called kinship compassion. Biology, I love my children, or that's rather easy if they don't cry the whole night, but it's kind of but not like this whole opening up to a whole other level. So you need basically both wings. You need the motivation arising out of these, what we call care or affiliative system, and this perspective, the bigger, higher meta level on beliefs, on self, on this. So when you measure that in the scanner, it looks like that. You have two different large-scale networks. One is the empathy compassion network, which is rooted in, like kind of limbic, paralimbic brain systems who are embodied. And then you have this green network, and that's what we call mentalizing network or cognitive perspective taking network. And it's interesting because nobody had ever asked the question, these two networks within the same brain, is there something like a general social intelligence? Are the people who are very big empathizers naturally also people who are good in this perspective taking, in this kind of, like bird's eye creeping in the belief system of others, even if they are incongruent to your own? And the answer is totally no. That's what we call a zero correlation. So it means some people are naturally empathizing a lot, feeling and resonating with people. 50, okay. And other people are really more having a cognitive approach to others. Some people are good in both, but so the reasoning was that we said, okay, there are all these networks, so we can also cultivate them with different exercises and different things. So that was just the background. So now I will just touch on some data to show you how these threesomeness, of the three modules, really show up as different practices in different aspects. So first we ask ourselves, do these three modules increase attention, compassion, and social intelligence, like perspective taking? And so that is the blue. This is what in the Shamatha project, was also a waitlist control. We had a retest control. This is people who don't do any meditation but get tested every 3 months. And you see, just getting older a year is not increasing your attention. However, look at that perhaps. After 3 months of attention-based mindfulness and compassion, you had a huge increase in attention performance. So you can say, okay, the apps, at least they are doing that. They are really stabilizing your mind and bringing people more in the presence. But the compassion-based practices do it too. So it's not just these kind of classic present moment, attention focused. Then we said, okay, how about compassion? And that was somehow a geeky thing because there was a debate at that time in the field. There were these kind of more mindfulness crowd around John Kabat-Zinn saying, if you basically, do a lot of these kind of attention-based presence moment mindfulness practice, you will also open your heart, you will also get more altruistic, more cooperative. Then there was this other camp which was more like explicit heart practice, like Paul Gilbert, Christine Neff, and so on, saying a bit, I think you really explicitly need to teach these practices to bring about these qualities of the heart. And of course, I'm only speaking now of 3 months and not a whole lifetime of practice. But this was interesting because what you see here is very clear in this project. 3 months of mindfulness attention didn't increase compassion as we measured it. It was really only when you did explicitly, these metta practice, gratefulness practice, and so on, that you really got a burst in compassion. You don't see any yellow here. And what we also ask ourselves is, these modules had these intersubjective social practices in it. So we ask ourselves, is it the same whether you do intersubjective practice on perspective taking and inner parts or on the heart, and the compassion to others? And so when you look at the data for theory of mind, you see that this kind of specific ability to understand that others have other beliefs than you, that this perspective taking is only improved after 3 months of this cognitive module. It is not improved after 3 months of heartfelt practice in interest. And that was kind of surprising because the other is also, taking this. So it really speaks that there are different systems. And when you look at the brain data, you see the same thing. You have to imagine brain data for us, where we grew up in a time as a neuroscientist where people said, after 25, your brain is only getting thinner, you're getting older, and you cannot learn anything anymore. No plasticity anymore. So that was how we grew up. No. So these data for people who grew up like me are revolutionary. Now, science changes all the time their claims. Now we know that there is plasticity over life. But we didn't know whether in the domain of this higher level capacity there is any plasticity. And that shows that after 3 months of attention-based mindfulness, you really get, like more these kind of prefrontal cortex. And then after 3 months of heart-based compassion practice, you have other networks getting thicker. So your brain is very susceptible to what you practice every day. It really matters what you practice. Same people, you will have different networks getting thicker depending on which practice you do. So never ever use the word meditation or mindfulness as something which would be a unitary thing. It's not. Okay, then I just go quickly now over. So this is what I call the phenomenological data. So we asked people when they were doing breathing meditation or metta meditation, the heart, how did it feel? What was your phenomenological experience when you were doing that? They took only 1 minute, and we had transcript of this interview of 28 pages. So it's a micro moment in consciousness converting into a huge amount of data of 1 minute consciousness, totally different than brain data, yeah. And it's difficult to do research with it because it's so broad and complex and qualitative, but that's one figure just to show you that it is incredible. For example, they saw colors, and we never instructed people to see colors during meditation. It was not part of the program. But you see, when they were observing thought, the focus was mostly on the brain, on the head, and they saw dark colors a lot. It was very reliable across the cohorts. And when you do the metta and the heart meditation, the focus is around the chest and the hand, a little bit the hand, and the colors are warm colors red, and so on. And when you do breathing meditation, transparent. And we saw that again and again. It's not just one person saying that and the other, no idea, you know. When we look at the words they use, you get this phenomenological cloud, which feels qualitatively, the qualia is totally different for these different experiences in these different practices. And very beautiful when you see the, you know, which word come up, like in loving kindness, it's warm, security, care, heartless joy, thankfulness, gratitude. But these words do not come up if it's observing thought. It's totally different phenomenological space. And we have now published a lot of paper on these phenomenological spaces which are experienced subjectively by people. Okay, then stress, perhaps one little funny data point which was a bit waffle.
Tania, my love.
We are finished? You said
7 minutes.
7 minutes.
Okay.
he was telling me before 15, so I was thinking, okay, so I do quickly. So the funny thing with the stress is that usually, and stress reduction research, you know, MBSR and so on, people have used a lot of questionnaires. And we asked, can we also measure social stress, the stress which you experience if you feel judged by others? You're not enough, you are not achieving enough, you're not good enough, whatever. And that's the form of stress in our modern society, which is the most causing diseases and problems. It's not the stress we have because we freeze or we are hungry, yeah, most of us. So you can measure it. I go through this, and what was surprising is this. After 3 months of this attention-based basic mindfulness practice, the cortisol axis, social stress on the cortisol hormonal axis of the body was not decreasing at all. No effect whatsoever. Oops, how to communicate that to the world of mindfulness was a bit like oop, oop, oop. And then we asked, do these other modules which were doing everyday intersubjective practice, and you learned that the other person in this intersubjective practice was not judging you, because you were also turning, and so you were not judging the other when you did it with, you know, there was this democracy of not wanting to be judged because you didn't want it to be judged, so you didn't judge the other. And that really brought stress down to 50% on the hormonal basis. It's a huge effect, but you needed this belonging, this interpersonal, intersubjective, you know, like what Buba said, the you, and you put it so nicely in the first day. I think meditative practice is a practice of interconnectedness and intersubjectivity, and not me alone. You know, even you can practice it alone. It's not about me alone just reducing stress. And you see, it doesn't reduce stress really if you have only this aspect. Anyway, so that is another finding. Questionnaires do not measure the objective thing. We always find that the questionnaires, whether it's stress or prosocial behavior, the trait questionnaire in psychology are not correlated to all the objective counterparts we are measuring. So it's really also a warning that, you know, a lot of research is taking these questionnaires. That was, you know, linking the resource project to economy, and also, to make a long story short, we had 14 different measures from behavioral economics, what we heard, you know, the first day. Like they really had to give money away, trust other people, make donations. So objective measure of kind of altruism, pure altruism, like really, are you trusting giving away? And here again, we were asking the same question: which module of the 3 practices is best in doing, in bringing about altruism? And here again, this was astonishing, even though after 3 months of attention-based mindfulness, there was a light increase in altruism, but it was really only this compassion-based heart model which brought about huge amount of altruism in behavior. So, you know, for economists, this is really a bit of a troublesome data point, because first they say preferences are fixed over time and cannot be changed. We show here that preference can be changed with 30 minutes exercise every day, and you can become an egoist to an altruist, using the measures the economists use. And they think they are stable over time. It's crazy, but anyway. So I showed these data in the World Economic Forum, and they said, we have to rewrite all our macroeconomic models. And I said, yes, start with it. Why not, because from psychologists we know. And then the other astonishing thing is that economists always think that the perspective module, the green one, should be the best in bringing about donations and altruism, because it's rationality. It's like knowing about the beliefs of the other. This is in their model. But now we show, open your heart, go into heart frequency in terms of your practice every day, and that is bringing about donations and altruism much more than any other practice, which is also confusing for many economists when you talk about it. So I just go to this is just a data point showing that practice needs time, and sometimes I like to show this because of this tendency of the businesses to say, we sell 2-day retreats for lots of money and then you get enlightened afterward. And this is just showing interoceptive body awareness. After 3 months, you don't get better. You don't have significant increase in interoceptive body awareness. And that was always a bit of a puzzle in the research field, because people said, how can you not become, you do every day a body scan, going through your body, getting aware of what you feel in the body, and you don't get better results on these measures. The answer we could derive from this study, because we did 6 months, 9 months, it just takes time. After 9 months, you have tiny little effects. It's not even big effect size. All the effects are not huge. So it means it takes a lot of lifetime practice for many things. It's a continuous process. So just to summarize this kind of study is to basically say the cultivation of our mind and of our heart and our body is a huge complex universe. And in science, we just start the baby steps into understanding the complexity of it and the fingerprints on a phenomenological level, on a brain level, on an immune and body level. And the fingerprints look very, very different, whether you open up your attentions to compassion, to gratitude, or whether you are focusing your attention on the present moment. And every practice has its benefit, but I think it's the totality of this world, over a long time, which then brings about a real shift in trait and change of your person and of your way you view the world. Is not by doing one practice with an app you will change your being. And so it is the kind of, I showed you that, for example, attention is improved by these kind of basic mindfulness practice, but altruism and compassion, you need also to have the intersubjective component. And then this kind of metacognitive awareness of self is yet another thing. And you need to practice that too. It's a difficult practice. Who are you? How is your identification with aspect of your personality creating your reality, your problems, your conflicts? Then I showed you that even in the brain it shows up to be different. The good news is even 55 years old are plastic still. That's cool. I mean, it's people like us. We can still change our structure of the brain, and it will really matter what you did. And then I also showed you that stress, social stress, is something which needs to be tackled by becoming awareness, by getting into an intersubjective relationship to others and practicing with others and not alone. And then, the translational work, of course, in my heart is to bring all this stuff out of the lab and to really bring it into society and to serve society with that, and to see how can you bring these aspects of secular ethics, compassion, back into health system, into education. And as I said, I think we have a huge responsibility as researchers to do it somehow the right way, and not, to forget about the context and forget about all these other qualities. And for that, I'm still puzzled, how can we do that accounting for the systems we're living in, which I mean, all the big systems, I have worked with economists long time, science since 20 years, are all individualistic, competitive, achievement motivated, short-term thinking in terms of contracts and everything. And how can we, with this structure in place in our world, bring these kind of practices in it without having this huge conflict of structure and content? And we have to, I think, work together between disciplines, because, for example, coaches, they always focus on the individual, but then they don't look at the system level. And so we need to bring that together, and that, I think, will be the challenge of the next 100 years or decade. Thank you. So now finished. One hour. Wonderful.